Hey there, I'm PhotoJoseph, and this is the final video in a 4-part series sponsored by both OWC and Atomos, where I shot a microdoc/interview of a new local bar cafe called Brewpub. I shot the interview on the Lumix GH7 in ProRes RAW internally using the superfast OWC media and the new Atomos Shinobi 2 monitor with touch camera control. The other 3 videos in this series are the interview itself, a deep dive into the OWC media, and a complete tour of the Atomos Shinobi 2. This final video is to show you how you can work with ProRes RAW media in DaVinci Resolve, which of course doesn't support ProRes RAW. This video is in 2 parts. The first part is quick and easy, how to convert ProRes RAW to a format that Resolve can edit from. That'll only take a couple of minutes to show. The second and much more complicated part is how to use that converted media in a DaVinci Resolve Cloud remote workflow. Regular viewers of the channel will know that I'm a big fan and user of the BMD Cloud workflow, and even did a really extensive video on that last year. This ProRes RAW solution somewhat breaks the cloud workflow, so I'm going to show you how to work around that. But first, let's just get some ProRes RAW into Resolve. First, let's just take a look at the ProRes RAW media. If I take one of these shots, open it up in QuickTime Player, we can see that this is in fact ProRes RAW. I'll do a get info on here, and there we go, Apple ProRes RAW. All right, so first things first, let's take a look at what happens if you try to import ProRes RAW into DaVinci Resolve. I'll go over here to my external hard drive, my OWC Express, and there's my ProRes RAW footage. And you'll see here that it shows up just as audio because all that Resolve will read is the audio file from that. If I import it, that's all I'm gonna get is audio files. So there is no way to bring the ProRes RAW video in without converting it first. So the tool that we use to convert it is called RAW Converter. It's actually free to download the app, and you have to buy individual modules for the cameras that you're going to be working with. So let's go ahead and get the app first. I'll open up the App Store and search for RAW Converter, and here it is. Within RAW Converter, if you scroll through the information, click on More, you'll see a complete list of all the cameras that are supported. And I'll tell you from experience that if you shoot with a camera that is not yet supported by RAW Converter, reach out to the company. They will likely ask you for some sample files, and then they can actually build a conversion so that you can purchase that for yourself. Anyway, let's get back to it. I, of course, already have this installed, so let's go ahead and open up RAW Converter. Now, first thing I want to show you is what happens if you add a file that you don't have support for. I'll go ahead and bring this one in from the Lumix S5 Mark II, and you can see that it says that it's missing, but that 300 frames can be converted. So that's a nice thing. You can actually do a trial conversion up to 300 frames of a file from any camera that they support before you purchase the module. Then once you're ready to buy it, you can see the modules are there. The modules are typically either $75 or $80. Let's go ahead and bring in all the footage that I need. Here's my ProRes RAW shot on the GH7. I'll just drag all that in. And now you can see these all have the OK license. Tap on any one of these to preview the file. From here you can play it, scrub through it, review what it is, and so on. At this point, all you need to do is choose your quality. The quality range goes from no compression up to a 7:1 compression. If you look on their website, they'll explain these different compression levels, and they'll also tell you what I'm going to tell you right now. It's worth trying the different compression levels to see if you really need a higher or highest quality. There's a huge difference in the sizes between the different ratios, so there's no reason to make a bigger file if you don't actually need it. What I would encourage you to do is to actually run some tests on your project, run them at the different compression levels, and see if you can even tell the difference and see at what point it's worth not even going any bigger. So anyway, once again, we choose the compression format. I think I did 5:1 for mine. You choose a destination folder and off you go. Just click the convert button and it'll do its thing. Here's a chart showing comparisons of my own media, showing how long it took to convert various files into various file formats, and of course their final sizes, just so you can get an idea of what that looks like. I've already converted all my files, so let's go ahead and have a look at what these come out like. You're converting them to CinemaDNG, and you'll notice here instead of video files, you now have folders, and inside of each folder, there's a series of DNG files. We'll look at it by list, and you can see that there's going to be a lot of them. There is a DNG for every single frame of video. That's how the CinemaDNG format works. And if we go to the very bottom of this list, you'll see that there is, in fact, an audio file. There it is. So you do get the audio file from your ProRes RAW footage. You can even shoot 32-bit float internal audio on the Lumix GH7, and this tool will extract the 32-bit float file. Now, when I shot this project, they didn't support that yet, so I didn't do this project in float, but that support is now there. Now let's get some of this CinemaDNG media into Resolve. If I go to the folder here on my drive, there's all the folders that we just saw. And if I take this entire CinemaDNG folder and drag it into Resolve, then what's gonna happen is we're gonna actually have a bin here for every clip, which is pretty tedious because you probably don't want every single clip inside of its own bin. So instead of doing it that way, go back up here in the Media tab and just select all of the folders themselves, not that top level folder. And then when you drag that in, now they're gonna each come in as individual video files and you don't have to have the extra bins. As you can see in here, as we look at each one of these files, the file name is the name that it was before, but then there's this extra part of the name here that shows how many frames it is. So it's frame 0 up through frame 59, up through frame 14,135, and so on. And of course the .dng at the end. Now that we've converted ProRes RAW to CinemaDNG, let's take a look at what RAW capabilities we actually do have inside of DaVinci Resolve. I'll sort these by name and grab all of these clips and add them to a timeline. Now let's jump over to the color room and see what we've got. So of course there is the video clip we were just looking at. To edit the raw metadata, you simply go to the Camera Raw tab and you'll see here the options that we have. Now by default, you're not gonna have access to any adjustments, and that's because we are decoding using the project settings. So let's talk for a moment about the difference between these setups here. If I go to project settings, then everything that is set up in the project settings under the Camera Raw tab is what we're going to be looking at here. Now, this interface, I will admit, is a little bit confusing. If I click on each one of these, let's say I set this to RE, you might naturally think that I am now going to try and decode all these raw files as if they were RE. Or if I was to go back in here and switch this to, say, Nikon RAW, that suddenly I would be trying to convert all these using Nikon RAW. That's not the case. This is just a pretty bad interface, to be honest. What this actually means is when you choose each one of those raw settings, you are then changing the settings underneath it for those raw profiles. Watch. If I go to RE and I change absolutely anything in here, it's not gonna make a single difference to these clips because these aren't RE clips. What I would do is go over here and go to CinemaDNG and then make changes. So if I was to change something in here, let's go to a project setting here and just like say I change the highlights, change the shadows and so on in here. And then I switch this over to RE and I do the same here. Let's go to project settings, make some changes. These settings here are specific to RE. When I go back to my CinemaDNG, there's the settings for that. So these settings here are specific to the raw profile chosen at the top, not necessarily saying that every raw clip in here is going to get converted with that raw profile settings. Again, just a bad interface. I'll go ahead and revert this, and if you wanted to, you could go in and change this to project and then make changes for every file that comes in. So for example, I could take the exposure for every shot and automatically underexpose it. So we'll go ahead and set this to negative 2.03. We see that that is now going to be the default, and as soon as I click save, you're gonna see every clip on here get darker. So now they're all underexposed by those couple of stops. I can override that though by simply going into the Camera Raw settings and saying decode using clip settings, and now each clip has its individual settings. All the settings that we saw before in the project level are now available at the clip level. So from here, I could say, oh, you know, this one wasn't really 2 stops under, that was only 1 stop under, so I'll fix that here. But you saw that it had that same negative 2.03 exposure drop. Now there's one adjustment here that you might notice appears to be missing, and that is ISO. ISO is not missing. ISO doesn't exist. ISO is a construct. Let me explain this. Camera sensors have what's called a base ISO. This is what the sensor is tuned to. Then the manufacturer might say that base ISO is 640, might say it's 5,000, whatever. They choose a number to go along with the sensitivity that they've dialed in. When you go above or below that ISO, you're not changing the ISO, you're just gaining the sensor up or down, making it essentially brighter or darker. It's largely the same as under or over exposing it. So what you have here in DaVinci Resolve as far as raw decode goes with non-Blackmagic files is no ISO slider, but you have an exposure slider, which is the same thing. So the fact that you don't have ISO doesn't matter. If you're shooting with Blackmagic cameras, then you will see an ISO slider, and that's because they're Blackmagic cameras on the Blackmagic software. They have control over that ecosystem. They're doing it their way. But here you're not losing anything. You have the same power and the same control, even with the CinemaDNG files shot on the Lumix GH7. And at this point, that's all you need to know to work with ProRes RAW footage in DaVinci Resolve. Just get that RAW converter app, purchase the module for whatever camera you're working with, convert to CinemaDNG, import, and off you go. So the next part of this is where things get complicated. If you're not working with the DaVinci Resolve cloud workflow, then this doesn't matter. Unless, for any reason, you would rather not have the RAW files on your timeline until the very end, in which case, keep watching. To understand the problem, first I need to explain how Resolve's cloud workflow works. There's two components to a cloud workflow, or any workflow really: the Resolve project itself and the media. When you work in a Resolve cloud workflow, the project lives in the Blackmagic cloud. This is a paid service, but it's only $5 a month per library, and a library can have virtually unlimited projects. Then, any editor anywhere in the world whom you grant access to can work on your project. The media is handled separately. You could FedEx a drive full of media to your editor or upload it to any cloud service for them to download. However you want to get it to them, that's up to you. But if you want an easy, seamless back and forth workflow where the editor automatically gets the media they need, you can use either Dropbox, Google Drive, or now Blackmagic's own cloud storage, which I have to say is the smoothest workflow and the path of least resistance. As long as you're only syncing proxy media, then it's really affordable to have enough cloud storage to have the media from several projects online at once. So, what's the problem? Well, think about the media you use in a video project. You have your video, of course, shot to ProRes, HEVC, H.264, whatever. These are your big originals. These you can make proxies of and upload the compressed, lower resolution proxy versions of easily. But not all media can be proxied. Audio files, graphics, photos, and so on don't get a proxy file. The good news is that Resolve understands the difference between a proxiable and a non-proxiable file and automatically uploads all of your original audio files, graphics files, photos, and so on to the cloud. Since they're relatively small, this works out great. The bad news is that these fancy CinemaDNG image sequences that we just made from our ProRes RAW originals are just DNG image files. Even though Resolve knows when importing them that these DNG image sequences are meant to be treated like a video file, the cloud and proxy engine does not. This, in my opinion, is a bug, and I've already filed it with Blackmagic. But until they resolve this, as it stands as of Resolve 19, when you import a DNG image sequence into a cloud project, all of those original DNG files will get uploaded, even though you've told Resolve to only upload proxy files. Resolve doesn't even automatically make a proxy file from these DNG sequences, although you can force it to make one, and that proxy will be uploaded, but so will all the original DNG files. So the solution is to make an interim original file to use for the cloud editing workflow, then swap that out towards the end of the project with the DNG sequences. This interim file is called a mezzanine file, or it could also be called a digital intermediary or DI, although technically I think DI really refers to a workflow that started in film. When working with digital RAW files, as we are, and making an interim high-quality compressed file to do most of the editing from, that's called a mezzanine file. Whatever you call it, and for whatever reason you use it, the mezzanine file acts as a stand-in for the RAW files where working in RAW isn't convenient or possible as in our cloud workflow. So here's the order of events. First, you make the mezzanine files, probably ProRes. Import those ProRes files to your cloud project and edit like normal. You'll have access to the ProRes Mezzanine temporary originals, and your remote editor will have access to the proxies that Resolve makes from those ProRes files, just like in any cloud workflow. When you're ready to finish the project, move it out of the cloud, then replace the ProRes files with the RAW files through a process called Conform. It's pretty straightforward, so let's get started. I'm going to start by creating a new cloud project. And when you're creating a new cloud project, you have to choose a location for your project media. So I'm just going to put this on my external drive here. And then under these options, you'll see you have the choice to share the project with multiple users. So allowing multiple simultaneous users or set it to single user. Usually you want it on multiple simultaneous. And then the important part here, synchronize storage with Blackmagic Cloud. You can not sync the media, you can sync only the proxies, or you can sync the proxies and the originals. Of course, what we want to do is sync just the proxies. If we sync the proxies and the originals, then no matter what we put in here, everything goes to the cloud, and that's going to take up a lot of space. But if we only want the proxies, then we choose proxies only. That's all I need to do, hit create, and now I've got my new project. Let's start by adding one of the CinemaDNG files so you can see what happens if we do add an actual DNG. I've got one here that I've labeled as small, so it's a nice small one. Let's go ahead and drop that in. As we saw before, it does get recognized as an image sequence, and there is the video clip. However, if I look down at my cloud settings, you'll see that it is currently uploading every single DNG. So as you might imagine, with a big project, this could fill up your cloud storage space very, very quickly. As I also mentioned before, you don't automatically get a proxy file, but that is easy to fix. You can just right click on the video clip and choose Generate Proxy Media. At that point, it'll go ahead and render out that proxy file for you. And if we check the status, we'll see that the proxy is getting uploaded as well. There it goes, proxy uploaded. So that's happening. And then over here, we can see that we have full cloud sync. So everything has now been synced to the cloud. But of course, this is exactly what we don't want to have happen. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of this video clip here. And let's get out of Resolve for a moment and open Apple's Compressor. Compressor is the tool that I'm going to use to create these mezzanine files. Remember, we need something that will read the ProRes RAW files. Since Resolve won't, we can't use Resolve to create these mezzanine files. Enter Compressor. I'll go ahead and take all of my ProRes RAW files, select those, drag them into Compressor, and from here you can choose what format you want. If you want a really high quality image at this point, then go ahead and do a ProRes 422 HQ. If you really are just using this for scratch and you're definitely going to replace it later, then save some space. Just go for 422 LT. That totally depends on you and your workflow and what you intend to do with these files. For example, if you're doing a bunch of green screen keying, then you're probably going to want to have that highest quality file. For general editing, just use the LT. Go ahead and drag that preset in. It'll apply it to all of them. Choose a source where you want them to go. I'm going to go ahead and put this into a new folder on my OWC Express 1M2 drive. We'll just call this ProRes Files. And click Choose. You'll notice that it has the Apple ProRes 422 LT name automatically appended to it. That's convenient, but it actually doesn't matter. You can have these files named whatever you want. When it comes to conforming the project back to the raw files, to the CinemaDNG files, all that actually matters is the timecode, and the timecode is going to be maintained throughout this entire project. Once you're ready to go, just click on Start Batch and that will render away. Now, of course, I've already got this done. So if we go back to my OWC drive, you'll see that I have this ProRes 422 LT folder that's got all my media in it. So this is the media that I want to bring into Resolve to edit from. So let's go back to Resolve. There's my 422 LT media. I'll just go ahead and import all of that. And now we have all of those video files ready to work from. You can also see that Resolve is automatically generating the proxies and syncing those to the cloud already. And once again, those are of course only going to be the proxy files. In fact, if we check this out right now, you can see that it is uploading the proxies for each of these, but not the originals. Great. So now let's go ahead and do a basic edit. I'm just gonna grab a few random clips in here so we have a bit of variety and drag those onto the timeline. And we're just gonna pretend that this is edited. I'm gonna drag a few pieces around in here just to have something different. And away we go. So let's just say, for the sake of the demo, that this is now our completed finished project. This is of course edited with that ProRes 422 LT. Or in the case of our remote editor, they were using the proxy files, but I, back home, have access to that ProRes 422 LT footage. But now I'm ready to conform this. I wanna bring this back to my raw files. So here's how this works. Step one is to get the project out of the cloud library. Because if you leave it here and you do the conform process, immediately all those DNG files are gonna start to upload. So that's step one. Here's how we do it. Go into the project manager, choose your new project, and then this button here is the copy project to button. Click on that and choose where you wanna copy it to. In our case, it's gonna go local, and I'm gonna put it in my Resolve library 2024. Click copy, and it copies that project over. Once that's done, make sure you actually do switch back over to the local library, and there's the project. One of the extra benefits you get from copying the project over is that you now have a backup. You still have that one in the cloud, and we're going to be working on the one that's local. So if somehow you mess this up, you can easily go back to the one in the cloud. You could also do another backup from here if you wanted to. I'll open up that local project, and to reconform a project, there's a couple steps I have to do. First, I need to select all of the media on the timeline, or at least all the media that you want to reconform. So this is actually important. If you were mixing this with media that is not going to be reconformed, so you've got other file projects in here, then you only want to select the files that you are going to replace. I don't think it would really matter if you selected everything because it's not going to replace a file that it can't find a match for, but to be safe, I would say try to select just the media that you actually want to replace at this point. We're gonna right-click on the clips in the timeline and choose the option Conform Lock Enabled. You can see that it is currently selected. So if I click it now and look at it again, that is now deselected. So Conform Lock is not enabled. Now I'm gonna import the original DNG media. So here's my CinemaDNG. Let's go ahead and create a new bin for this called RAW files. And I'm gonna select all of these, drag them in, and now there's all my CinemaDNG files. And remember, since we're not in a cloud project anymore, these files aren't being uploaded. Now let's go back to that timeline, right-click the timeline, go to the Timelines menu, and choose Reconform from bins. Going through the choices in here, it says attempt to reconform all clips or selected clips. We're gonna go ahead and leave it at all clips. Set clips to conform lock enabled after conform. That's a good idea. That just relocks the clips once they've been conformed. And then you choose where it's gonna conform from. You don't wanna have everything selected. You want just your raw files bin selected. Then the conform options. How is it going to conform? There's a lot of different options in here that you can match to, but the only thing that we need is time code. Click OK, and that's it. There is no confirmation, it just happens. Now if I open up this timeline, we'll see that we are actually looking at the raw media. Now, how do we know we're looking at the raw media? Well, first of all, we can see here on the timeline that the file names have the .dng sequence, so that's a pretty good indicator right there. But of course, we can also go into the color room, notice that we do have access to camera raw, and sure enough, there's our camera raw settings, and we can change these however we like. So that's it. It really is pretty straightforward. This whole Conform workflow is fantastic. It's designed for the film industry, right? For people working on really big, fancy projects. This is just a YouTube video, but I shot it in a format that Resolve does not support, converted it to a file format that Resolve supports, the CinemaDNG, but kind of gets in the way of my cloud workflow. So created this intermediary file called a mezzanine file, and that's what we're working with. So that's all there is to it. Pretty straightforward and a pretty cool way to work with ProRes RAW footage inside of Resolve. Let me know what you think, and if you have any better ideas of how this could be improved even more, please let me know in the comments. I'm always anxious to hear from the community how I could be doing things even better than I've shown you here. Take care of yourselves. We'll see you in the next video.